now it's been a little while since we've had a Liverpool transfer update, but things are starting to move in the market again, and so I thought it was worth jumping on to update you on those. And I think we'll start with the big breaking news that's come out today concerning Luis Diaz. Now, that news broken by David Ornstein. It doesn't need me to confirm his stories, that's for sure, but I can confirm it is the case that Liverpool have rejected a bid from Bayern Munich, which is worth 67.5 million euros, so 58.6 million pounds. Now, we know that Bayern had approached Liverpool in early July to sound out the conditions for a move for Luis Diaz, and they were told in no uncertain terms that the player wasn't for sale. That approach immediately rejected, but they've not been put off. They've now returned with a bid, as I say, that 67.5 million euro bid, and it clearly shows that Bayern Munich are quite keen to get Luis Diaz this summer if possible. I think that keenness is key because it means that this was an opening offer, as I understand it, and I think we can expect a second and maybe higher bid to come in from Bayern because they clearly want to make an addition in that part of the pitch. Of course, they were quite keen on Florian Wirtz, weren't they, before he chose to join Liverpool instead. They were also keen on Nico Williams at Athletic Bilbao, who's ultimately ended up signing a contract extension. And now with Jamal Musiala out with a fairly serious injury, they need reinforcements in that attacking area, particularly ones who can maybe operate off the left or maybe even central zones when you think about Diaz's versatility. So for them, he would represent an ideal signing. So they're clearly keen to get that one over the line. And I don't think this is going to be the last bid we see from Bayern for Luis Diaz this summer for sure. Now, just to give you the kind of Liverpool perspective on this and what we're hearing from sources close to the club at the moment, they are maintaining their stance that Luis Diaz isn't for sale this summer. They've been pretty consistent on that one from the start, really. Obviously, the only valuation they're currently putting on the player is an internal valuation, which is they use that generally. They would have that for every player on the market to get an idea of, you know, what's the highest, what's the limit we would go to if we wanted to buy this player. Now, they don't just do that for players at other clubs. They do it for the ones that they've got already to know where's a reasonable amount for them to sell at. And they say that their internal valuation on the player is 100 million euros, so pretty high and quite away really from 67.5, so a big gap in the valuations there. I mean, the argument is, from Liverpool's perspective, is look at the market at the moment. So you see, for example, the big Saudi interest in Bruno Fernandes, who is 2 years older. That big interest, it didn't come to anything in the end. He opted to stay at Manchester United, but the Saudi clubs were willing to pay 100 million euros to sign him. So that's an experienced, impressive Premier League performer. Luis Diaz is exactly that. He's played a key part in Liverpool winning the Premier League last season, so why wouldn't he be valued around a similar amount? Now, clearly, as much as that is true, as much as Liverpool are saying this is kind of their internal valuation, they're pointing to the Bruno Fernandes situation, I think it is also obvious as well that this not for sale stance comes with a caveat. And I think that caveat is clearly, and I've said again, I've reported this all summer myself, that clearly is going to be a figure at which they would come to the table. He isn't Mohamed Salah, is he? He isn't Virgil van Dijk. He isn't one of those completely unsellable players, Luis Diaz. There's always going to be a number that will bring them to the table. And so the idea is that clubs now, they force Liverpool's hand, and the way that they do that is putting an amount of money on the table that Liverpool think we've got to probably consider this. Now, I don't expect that will be 100 million euros. I don't think Bayern are going to go that far. But maybe they can get a little bit closer to that. And if they get a little bit closer to that, that then gives Liverpool a decision to make, doesn't it? I think that's the key aspect here. Bayern have got to go far enough in their bids to make Liverpool sit down and have to consider it. So the onus is massively on them after that first rejected bid, that opening bid. Now they've got to go a bit further with the second bid and see if it's enough to bring Liverpool to the table. So that's a fascinating part. Of course, there is a third part in this scenario. It's not just about Bayern, not just about Liverpool, but also Luis Diaz himself. And I think, again, we're seeing clear messaging now from the player's side that he is very much keen on a move away from Liverpool this summer. I think the fact that Bayern are bidding for him, of course, is evidence enough of that. They wouldn't be putting in a bid blind if the player hadn't said to them that he was at least keen on the move. So I think we're seeing real evidence of the fact that he is and he wants to go. And I think it's obvious as well, there's been talk, hasn't there, all window about Saudi interest, but I think it's clear he's also favouring the European interest. He doesn't quite want to go to Saudi yet. He would prefer to stay with a European club, be that Barcelona, who I don't think are going to be involved at the figures talked about here, or Bayern Munich. He would prefer to go there than Saudi Arabia. Now, it'll be interesting to see if Bayern can't get a deal over the line, if Barcelona can't, and like I say, I don't expect that will be the case. Maybe later in the window he decides he will be open to a Saudi move, because of course a big consideration for the player here is his contract. Now, it's not as low as people often mention. I repeat that many times. He's not getting paid 55 grand a week as is often reported. It's much higher than that, but he is relatively low compared to some of his other peers at Liverpool, and he wants a pay rise. Now, Liverpool are not going to give him that. There's no plans to give him a new contract. They are happy for the player to see out the 2 years that he has remaining on his current deal, because it is at reasonable wages, but the player really wants to get paid at this point. And so if he's not going to get a contract from Liverpool, it makes sense to kind of force a move and to try and get that money elsewhere. Now, clearly Bayern, they are very good payers. They will be interested in giving him that sort of money. I'm absolutely sure about it. So it's easy to see why the player definitely wants to get the move away from Liverpool. But as I say, as much as his desire is there, as much as Bayern want to sign him because of the vacancy they've got in attack, I didn't even mention Leroy Sané's departure, did I? That's another aspect here. But as much as those elements are there, they've got to come up with an amount of money that's going to give Liverpool a decision to make. And as of yet, that hasn't happened. But that first bid rejected, we'll see what happens when the second one comes. Now, away from Luis Diaz, there are a couple of other topics I want to talk about in this video just quickly, and one of those is, of course, another player who is primed for a potential exit this summer is Darwin Nunez. Now, that story is kind of rumbling on at the moment. Now, it appears, judging by the reports from the Italian side of things, that Napoli are now out of the race. They don't seem to want to reach the valuation that Liverpool have put on the player, or even get close to it. Liverpool is stuck to the guns around that valuation, and so Napoli saying that's too expensive for them at the moment. Now, that valuation is understood to be around 70 million euros, so around 60 million pounds. And again, you look around the European clubs and the money and the spending power that's out there outside of the Premier League, that looks a big stretch for some of these clubs. And who's going to pay that for Darwin Nunez when he's been okay at Liverpool but quite inconsistent, which is the reason that they're open to the sale. So it looks like that European interest is kind of waning. Napoli was an option that he was keen on. We know Atletico Madrid had some interest, but that hasn't become firm yet. So the player's now looking out there for what his other options are, and I think one of the key options for him is going to be that Saudi interest, which was there in January. It now looks to be kind of firing up again. And of course, the club that is leading the chase there is Al Hilal. Now, as I understand it, as I record this video at the moment, no formal approach this summer yet, but it does look like they are sizing that up, and that's a consideration for the remainder of the window. Now, kind of different to Luis Diaz in this situation, in that I think there is more of a willingness to go to Saudi for Darwin Nunez than there was for Luis Diaz. We know that was definitely the case in the January window. He was open to go into Al Hilal and kind of quite unhappy, I believe, about the fact that he wasn't allowed to go at that moment. So I think more of a willingness there for him to go to Saudi Arabia. And so if that's the case, it's just a waiting game now for Al Hilal to firm things up, because they look the likely front runners if they come with a reasonable amount. You know what the Saudi clubs are like, more likely to hit Liverpool's valuation or get closer to it as well, aren't they? So we just wait and see on that one. But that story's still rumbling on, with Napoli not looking likely to get to the sort of figure that Liverpool want. Of course, it's clear to the player as well. As much as I thought he did well in the Preston game as well, the opportunities aren't going to be there under Arne Slot. I don't think anything that's happened has really changed the position on that. I think he's still going to be a kind of fringe player under Arne Slot, isn't he, for Liverpool? So it's just, I think the best move for everybody is if this Saudi interest gets firmed up. But as I say, we're just in a moment now where we wait to see whether that happens. But that can happen very, very quickly, and we'll see what the latest developments on that story. And another one I want to touch on again, a potential departure, is Ibrahima Konate. So much talk around him at the moment. There's been no movement, as I understand it, on the contract talks, which is unfortunate. Obviously, such a key player, and he's coming into the final 12 months of his contract. There's been an awful lot of chatter about the idea that he's now just waiting to run down his contract and join Real Madrid. Now, I will say that sources close to the player are kind of denying those stories and suggesting that that is not the case, that the player is just willing to run down his contract. They insist that contract talks are still ongoing, and they are just waiting for the right offer to come in from Liverpool to get that signed. So, these kind of I don't know, not a war of words, I guess, between clubs and players, but sometimes it will happen in terms of who gets the story right, or who's trying to set the agenda or put their own version of events out there. So we do see this a lot in contract negotiations. We saw it with Trent Alexander-Arnold's situation. We saw it with Van Dijk, with Salah. So I guess from Liverpool's perspective, that's still kind of rumbling on. There's no indication from Liverpool's side of things in terms of what they want to do with this. I did check on that today. So, you see in talk that they might want to cash in, or I'd seen a lot of fans suggest that that should be the case. They should cash in this summer if they aren't able to reach an agreement with the player on a contract. And Liverpool not yet taking a stance on that. I guess they will at the point at which someone like Real Madrid maybe approaches them. There's been talk of PSG interest as well. So we don't quite know whether Liverpool would sanction a sale. I have to say, my personal view is that they shouldn't do that this summer. I think continuity is more important, even if you have to accept that the player leaves on a free. I think a team with Konate in it is more likely to defend the Premier League title, but that's just my view. And of course, my view doesn't matter in these situations, but it's one of those we will see. Again, those talks are ongoing around a contract, and there's still some optimism on the Liverpool side that it'll be resolved, but we will have to see. It's just one of those. Again, it's one that's going to rumble on over the summer, and we'll see. Until a club approaches Liverpool and gives them a decision to make, until Konate says he definitely doesn't want to sign, there's kind of no real movement on those, except to say that the contract hasn't been wrapped up yet. But I really hope it is, because I think he's a key player for Liverpool, and as I say, I think they need to have him for next season regardless. But again, I don't get a say in these things. It's up to Richard Hughes, isn't it, to decide whether that's going to be the case. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. Please let me know your thoughts on the latest developments. Luis Diaz, what's a reasonable valuation that you would put on him? Similar with Darwin Nunez, similar with Konate. In fact, would you sell him? Would you keep him this summer? What would you do? I say I prefer to keep him, but maybe some will disagree and want to get him out after the disappointment of the Trent Alexander-Arnold situation. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on that in the comments section. As usual, if you can like and subscribe, it's much appreciated, and I'll see you guys very soon.